Dead Estate is a game that lets you play as a himbo using the power of cubes to pulverize sharks so hard the game struggles to keep up. Roguelikes are one of my favourite genres of games. The genre ballooned into popularity over the past 2 decades, bringing with it a bevy of titles holding the moniker. So I decided to look back upon them, old, current and new, to see how they all stand up on their own. Welcome to my adventure as I explore each roguelike I can sink my teeth into to see what about the genre is so standout, and maybe even find the best. Or I could rip off Joff Strife Haze even more and deliberately hunt for the worst ones I can find. Maybe if the well runs dry enough. But what is a roguelike? Well, to keep it brief, they're a genre of games that typically focus on randomized playthroughs, meta progression, and are typically shorter, run focused. Basically, does the game remind you of The Binding of Isaac, yes or no? Also, for brevity's sake, I'm going to call them all roguelikes, since if you want to be pedantic, some of them can be defined as roguelites, but that's a debate for another video. Today we're going to be looking at the small indie title, get used to hearing that, Dead Estate, produced by Milk Bar Lads and published by Two Left Thumbs in October of 2021. This title is one I've been a small fan of for the past while. It's the studio's first and seemingly only game on Steam at the moment, sitting at overwhelmingly positive reviews for 2 years straight. I could explain the entire game to you head to toe here, but how about instead I show you, whilst explaining more as we go along. Booting up the game, after being showcased a lovely little animated intro, you're presented with your choice of characters. You have 2 unlocked from the get-go, with 10 in total to unlock. A good selection of characters is always a great sign for games like this. Your choices are Jeff, a trucker who bears a higher HP pool but lower agility, or Jules, a student with the opposite stats, higher agility, lower health. Ignore the other characters for now, this is my main save file. Each character also starts with their own weapon, with Jeff bringing a handgun and Jules a shotgun. Whilst these characters are only merely statistically different, sans their weapons, later characters do boast different selections of abilities, but nothing too groundbreakingly different. Obvious parallels to draw would be Nuclear Throne. I expect a lot of parallels to that game honestly, but I'm not going to complain, that game owns. Since I'm basic and I love having room for error, I picked Jeff as my starting character because he reminds me of myself in 10 years, 5 if I'm lucky. After selecting our character, we're thrust into the first level of the game, the estate itself. WASD movement and mouse to aim, space to jump. The world is presented to us in a really well made pixel art isometric perspective. Rooms are small, only taking up 1 per screen, and are interconnected via doors, like the classic Binding of Isaac. Essentials out of the way, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of the game, the combat. Of which, as you can see, is your standard twin stick shooting deal. Honestly, it feels pretty competent. The starting weapon we have bears unlimited ammo, a trait not shared with other weapons in the game. So with this thing we can just open fire into anything, no questions asked. Since this is a floor-based roguelike a la The Binding of Isaac, every floor is divided into certain special rooms. The first we'll check out is the shop. Actually, we'll come back to the shop later. Instead, the first room we'll check out is the key room. This room's got a key in it. There's no consumables like bombs, keys or anything in this game, so the key is used instead to open the boss room, harking back to the old Zelda games. I'm surprised more action roguelikes don't have boss keys more often. It's a neat mechanic that requires you to explore floors more thoroughly and helps pad out the run in a fair enough way. After battling rooms of zombies, leeches, zombies but big, and gross blood clots which are your typical slime enemy, we find our first item room. In here we find rat poison, which makes Chunks spawn with lower HP. What is a Chunks? Oh no. Who is Chunks? You'll see soon, don't worry. You also probably noticed this game has a jump button. You can maneuver the level by jumping on top of pots, cabinets, and even over hazards such as spikes or enemy shots. Later floors have enemies that move on the Y layer too, so jumping is a requirement later on. Rarely do games like this employ verticality in its combat, so it's nice to see. I do have some gripes with it later on though, however. We come across a challenge room. Think about how these things function in The Binding of Isaac, except these ones have a time limit. Defeat the waves of enemies to get your prize, which I so valiantly do, earning myself some extra knockback on my shots. Good for keeping enemies in melee range away. Clearing out more rooms leads me to the weapon room. Much like the item room, you have one of these per floor and it grants you a free weapon. we scored ourselves a syringe gun that deals poisonous damage. You can swap to your other gun which will typically have limited ammo, so I'm going to save this for when I really need it. But we find the boss room. With our key we can go in there. But we got plenty of money from killing enemies, so I think it's time we go visit the shop and address the elephant in the room.
Stranger.
So the shopkeeper, as you can tell, has some really cool items on sale. She's selling us a speed upgrade, a chance to get better items and an all stats up. I'll snag those last two items since we got the cash for it. She also, every floor, sells a map and a full heal. Anyway, there's not much else to say about her. Let's go take care of that boss. The boss is this big thing. I think it's supposed to be a beetle. It spits blood and spawns creatures to fight alongside it. But using our cool syringe gun, we take it down with little to no resistance. There are other difficulties in this game that you unlock as you win, but for the video's sake, I'm playing on normal mode. With that out of the way, we hop onto the elevator and go down to the next floor, the upper story. A vast change in scenery already. You also probably noticed, as in it's hard not to notice, that it's on fire. This is a mechanic some floors can have, where they have a random modifier. For this one, since it's burning, some parts will explode, makes perfect sense, and enemies will fall from upper floors due to the whole integrity of the room falling apart. Alternative floors are something I really enjoy in roguelikes, since it's a simple but effective way to make new runs slightly different, which is key for the genre. Speaking of diversity, as well as being presented with a new floor theme, each floor introduces new enemies to the mix, from freaky, teleporting, Silent Hill looking nurses, hanging cages composing of writhing masses of meat and teeth, to cultists that shoot out barrages of blood at you. It's all gnarly. Enemies will occasionally drop hearts on death. As well as this, you can also get hearts rarely from red vases. All vases have a chance to contain stuff, but it's a risk versus reward. You'll see why soon. In the next item room, we score ourselves a Friday Night Pumpkin. Jeez, I wonder what that's a reference to. It makes every fourth shot deal more damage. I ain't gonna say no to that. Trundling around the floor, you may notice occasionally outlines of doors and paths that ain't actually there. These are secret rooms and can contain money and sometimes items. On lower difficulties, these are just a nice bonus, but later difficulties require them since item rooms themselves become secret rooms. Which is a bit of a weird design choice, since it just makes item rooms more tedious to find. Enough waffling on, we got the lady that's in the thumbnails to talk to. She always sells you free items, plus the map and a full heal. I'm only interested in mitosis at the moment, which grants our shots a chance to split on impact. I'm a bit of a fiend when it comes to items in games like that, which makes my shots all wacky. The other items she's selling are interesting too, with one giving more max HP the more money we have, and the other giving dead enemies a chance to spawn ghosts. Ooh! Items in this game are really interesting. You got your basic stat upgrades, but most of the time you gotta find some interesting gimmicks, and they stack too. More on that later. One detail I do love about this game is its use of text formatting in item descriptions. Look at how the description for Spirit Jar uses different colour text to highlight key points in the item description, as well as how the word ghost is all grey and wavy. Such an adorable detail that I love so much. Now, something that is a bit quirky about this game. The way weapons work is that you have your main weapon and your off weapon, the off weapon typically being limited in ammo. You can only have one off weapon at a time, again, typically, so if you pick up another weapon it will straight up destroy your old off weapon and replace it in its stead. You can't leave your old weapon behind, it's either take the new one or don't. There are lots of items that interact with this mechanic, and one we see later in the run too, so the game works around this. You can also destroy your off weapon at any point, turning into money by holding down the swap button. With this said, I destroy my syringe gun for some coins and take the new weapon, a bone. It's a bone. Swing it. The theme of this game is really nice, so far focusing on traditional spooky zombies, skeletons, and a bit of cultisty body horror. Very boo haunted house aesthetic, which is enforced even more by the music design. I clear out another challenge room with my cool bone to get myself an item that grants me money as long as I'm at 1 HP in a room of enemies. Nothing too earth-shattering, but I'm not going to say no to a free-ish item. Oh right, I forgot to mention until now, every floor has an alternative shopkeeper too. The last floor was a nurse, so this one is an arms dealer. They sell weapons, and my eyes were immediately drawn to the sex gun. So with little hesitation I bought it, replacing my bone with the power of sex. that being 6 bullets. It's short for sextuple gunnery. But as we head to the boss room, a knocking sound gets louder, louder, closer and closer. This is Chunks. He will spawn on the floor after a certain time limit, chasing you down relentlessly. He follows you from room to room, trying to kill you, even rooms with enemies in them. Though you can leave out the door he comes in if he does this. You can try fighting him, but it's a long and tough battle. Your best bet is to lose him by running away for long enough, or hiding in a shop for a bit. He will come back though, even if you defeat him. The Chunks mechanic is pretty interesting. It is clearly meant to be the game's version of a Resident Evil style pursuer enemy. Heck, even his design kinda looks like Nemesis from Resident Evil 3. It can also draw similarities to the Ghost from Spelunky, except way more forgiving. He exists to keep you on your feet, turning time itself into a valuable resource. Do you spend extra time breaking every pot, clearing every room, lest you risk being chased by him constantly? And if you do you want to try and fight him? The fact that there's also items that incorporate his mechanic, like the rat poison we found at the start of the game, as well as many more we don't see, is a really cool way to implement a timer-based enemy. This, however, does change the pace of the game drastically, which some might not enjoy. Anyway, after running from Chunks, it's time for the second boss. It's an egg. It spawns enemies and shoots out waves of bullets, being only vulnerable to damage during the latter. Honestly, not the most inspired boss mechanically or design-wise, and definitely no match for the power of the sex gun combined with the splitting bullets. Easy peasy. Now, Dead Estate didn't come from nowhere. Whilst I did mention this was Milkbar Lads' only game on Steam at the moment, it's not the only game they've worked on together as a collective. If you dive on over to their Newgrounds page, you'll see that they've worked on several games such as Bonkers, Huckabee Mumba 3, Dwayne Crashes, and oh my. But among these titles, you'll also notice Dead Estate Classic. Before the game was picked up to be a fully fledged game on Steam, it started out as a little something something on Newgrounds, and you can check it out with a link in the description. It's a much earlier build of the game, but it's nice seeing how far it's come. Anyway, where were we? Oh yeah, floor 3, the Attic Sanctum. This floor, much like the last one, introduces new enemies and theming to the already thematic estate. I decided to dedicate a lot of time breaking vases for extra HP on this floor. The health economy in this game is very basic, just your traditional hit point based system, with most enemies doing 1 hit of damage all the time. Hearts seem to be pretty common, especially on lower difficulties, and with shops offering full heals every floor, makes the game a lot more relaxed when it comes to playing recklessly. Our item room contains the elevator button. This makes special floors appear after every floor from now on. I'll show you this after the boss. Also, our weapon room had an axe, but as I mentioned, if we take any other weapon, we'd lose our existing one. And I'm not saying goodbye to my sex gun that easily. I forgot to mention, ammo can either be bought at the arms dealer, or found rarely from ammo packs on the ground, as well as certain items granting you a bunch. In this room we're introduced to an enemy that floats up and down, whilst an invincible guide chases us down. The heart itself utilises the Y-axis like I mentioned earlier. It forces you to focus on the enemy instead of just filling the room with lead like other action roguelikes typically employ. Although getting the timing and aiming lined up can be tedious, it's a decent way to incorporate the game's use of elevation in combat. We have the nurse on this floor, since on the last one we had the arms dealer. She simply sells straight up stat upgrades and health. So with my massive wallet full of dollars, I just buy 1 of each and head on my way, dealing with whatever the heck these creatures are meant to be. Now, a common issue a lot of games with open floor level designs have is that it can be sometimes a bit time consuming to constantly backtrack between rooms and such. It's an issue in The Binding of Isaac, leaving a lot of time between action. Games since then have employed their own solutions to the issue, such as Enter the Gungeon having the teleporter system, or even just removing backtracking entirely like in Hades. Dead Estate's solution are these weird crystal rooms. They typically appear at terminuses on the floor, and breaking a crystal will teleport you back to the starting room. Just once though. They only have 1 use each. It's an interesting way to attempt to solve the issue of backtracking. I'm not completely sure how I feel about it, but it does get chunks off your tail though. No matter, we grab the boss key, fight some meat rabbits, do the challenge room and score ourselves some extra melee damage before dealing with this floor's boss, Clown. A silly little clown that bounces around, shooting bullets all over. It jumps in the air, so you gotta jump with its rhythm to damage it before it runs around like a little baby. Nothing too hard to deal with thanks to our... Oh, great. Okay, it's time to talk about this mechanic. Whilst you can find ammo for your weapons, if they happen to run completely empty, the weapon gets straight up destroyed. It's one of the few mechanics I just don't like about this game. It solely exists to punish the player for not paying attention to their ammo and firing off their last shot, forcing you to get close to the red line as much as possible, or risk potentially losing a heavy part of your arsenal. Especially it makes no sense since you can find ammo packs anyway, so it doesn't feel like guns are supposed to be consumed. Because of this, I went back and grabbed the axe from the weapon room. Rest in peace, sex gun. Remember that elevator button we found? It lets us go to a bonus floor, so let's check that out now. Bonus floors can rarely, if you don't have the item of course, appear between any floor, and offer all sorts of services. This one is your traditional meta roguelike style bank, letting you store cash between runs as well as having lots of golden pots. In my experience, a bit too situational to be useful most of the time, but yeah, it's nice. Continuing with the horror tropes, welcome to the laboratory. No idea why it's on the 4th floor of his house, but it's a completely different theme, with science, freakish experiments everywhere, mutants, yep, still cultists. Anyway, we buy X marks the spot from Cordelia, that's her name, thank me later, which will show us the secret rooms on this floor. But who cares about that, when our item room gives us a satellite that will bombard enemies when we enter a room. Now this is what I was talking about when I said items can get a little bit wacky. Just wait until the next run. We hop into the challenge room and take a lot of silly damage. The enemies are starting to get a little bit complicated with their attacks. Plus the loss of our sex gun is really killing my buzz. I mean, the axe is fine, but actually I don't know how many times I can say sex without YouTube demonetizing me. I'll play it safe. Like safe sex. Anyway, the items we get were nothing crazy, just a buff to a shotgun we don't have, and the ability to find and use magical staffs. Ooh. Spoiler alert, we don't find any on this run. Oh. When it comes to floors every run, it's always the same 4 floors. But as you saw, they can have variants like being on fire and such. But maybe there'll be more on the next run? Yeah, come on, is roguelike DNA to have the first run be like half of the actual game? We find the arms dealer again. She's selling all sorts of weird guns, so I buy the most vanilla looking one possible, a chain shotgun, since it was synergized with the shotgun buff item we got earlier, and honestly, it kinda sucks. A really fast firing shotgun that barely does any damage. Oh, I missed a sex gun. Stop it, Asher, we get it. Anyway, Chunks is on our tail, so we gotta wrap up this floor, pronto. He may move slower in rooms with enemies, but his presence alone is enough to mess up my survivability entirely. We grab a new machine gun to replace our lame shotgun, pop a visit to our favourite girl to grab a full heal to make up for the damage we took, and head our way to this floor's boss. It's Cultist Chief Sybil. Her attacks are the most varied we've seen in a boss so far, employing direct shots, orbiting projectiles, and all sorts. A great boss in all honesty when compared to the weird egg. Also, when you defeat her, she flips you off before teleporting away. I love that. Please, give bosses more character in games. With that floor well and truly kicking our behind, we wrap up and head to the bonus floor. It's the kitchen. It offers you a bunch of free food related pickups and Cordelia's mum, who sells you food related items for cheap. One of the best bonus stages you can get. We gather all sorts of stat ups, increased bullet speed, a delay to chunks is spawning, all good stuff. As you can see by the way, we do have multiple of the same item. This game lets you stack items, kinda like Risk of Rain does, but not to the degree of 17 Lensmaker's glasses. Despite this, there's over 220 items in the game, so stacking them is rare, unless you loop. But now, it's time for the final floor. Welcome to the balcony, the point of no return. This floor exists to let you stock up on health, some last moment items and weapons before dealing with the game's climax. Or, you can jump off the balcony to go back to the first stage, looping the game. Like all good action roguelikes, it's got looping in it. Nice. However, I'm not in the market for that, so I take my error gun, buy a glass eye for homing shots from Cordelia, before making my way up once more to the real last level, fittingly named Dead Estate. God, I love it when games name the final stage of their game the title of the game. Passing through a bunch of moody red corridors, we face a locked door. Breaking the lock starts a countdown. And a fight with Chunks for one last time. Our error gun shoots out random projectiles and honestly wipes the floor with him. The boss itself has some cool attacks, but the one counter to cool attacks is overwhelming damage. But, like in true Resident Evil fashion, with a self-destruct sequence as our background music, we're given a rocket launcher to deal the killing blow to the final boss, ending our run. So that's Dead Estate. Oh come on, we all know how roguelites work. The first run is only half of the actual game. But that aside, a standard run like that only lasts 25 to 30 minutes, which is a good bite-sized amount of time for a time waster, which roguelites often take pride in. But we're hardcore gamers, so let's go again as we wrap up this retrospect. I'll spare you the details this time around, since you know how the average run works. We will pick a different character though. I'm gonna go with Axel, who is my favourite himbo. He's got throwing axes, average stats, and a secret stash every floor full of goodies. An example of one of the more interesting characters in the game. You can also see I have every character unlocked, as well as some skins for them. That's right, this game's meta progression is about unlocking new characters, new skins for them, as well as curses. These are purchased with the currency you get for beating the game, and they modify the characters in certain ways, like this one from Mumba, that makes him the best character ever. Each character has like 2 unlockable skins and 3 curses, so there's enough unlockable guff to keep you very busy. Now, whilst not much changes on your second run through, what you're granted access to after you take the normal ending is an alternative red elevator after each boss fight. This takes you to the alternative floors. Yep, as well as your usual 4 to 5 floors, you get 5 extra floors per run to deal with. So if you thought your standard run was a little bit too short, here you go. These floors are much harder typically, with stronger enemies, stronger bosses, and no traditional shops. The alternative floors are the best in the game with their designing and themes. You get gardens full of gnomes, bats, and buried undead. You get an ancient temple with ghosts, skeletons, and mummies. Oh, not those kinds. You get the lost... and you have a sunken ship level with funny sharks and octopus. It all leads into my favourite thing about the game, character. And I don't mean the literal characters, even though I do love them too. I just mean how much character this game oozes from every orifice. Little things from the boss flipping you off when it dies, the text and item descriptions being all dynamic, to even what might be my favourite detail. If you pause the game whilst Chunks is chasing you, the text which typically says paused will instead taunt you. All of this wrapped up in a bow with its charming art style and beepy music, and that's not discounting the characters themselves too. Cordelia, the shopkeeper, remarks when entering the shop depending on who you're playing as, such as rebuffing Axel's flirting, and having something to say about every item before you buy it. But what's a roguelike without run diversity? Well, to surmise how my second run went, as well as facing different bosses each floor, I met a talking toilet that wanted toilet paper. I also got a weapon that drops cubes on enemies, which I was able to convert to my main weapon so it had infinite ammo, massive stats upgrades, a bunch of weird effects that fire off whenever I enter the room, and of course... no way, real! All of this was bonkers overpowered, like a true good roguelike. Being able to break the game is DNA. And I feel that that's the best way I can show off Dead Estate. If you want to see the full true ending path, do it yourself. It's a charming action roguelike that's absolutely oozing with character and so many items to make each run stand out, with plenty of unlockables to keep you busy for the long haul in its bite-sized runs. There's many more mechanics I omitted from the video, so give the game a try, and there's going to be something to look forward to. Sure, I have issues with some places here and there, like the whole weapon system and how sometimes rooms can be a bit too cluttered, with projectiles being hard to notice if they're above or below you, but I'm sure those kinks will be worked out for Dead Estate 2, Deader Estate. For the developers' first time working on a commercial roguelike, they hit the nail on the head surprisingly well for their first attempt. And did I mention it's still getting updates? Since launch, the developers have reached 4 huge updates with new characters, items and mechanics, with 2 more planned, and 1 even coming out next week. To wrap up this overview, I think I'll give the game 4 sex guns out of 5. Thank you all for watching, and thank you especially if you made it this far. Massive shout out to all the channel supporters, and thank you for sticking around this alternative style content. I hope you all have a lovely day. Cheers.